I've been coaching leaders for the last 17 years on topics like sales, growth, growing their business, getting more free time, priority management, marketing, building teams, unifying teams, growing their business, scaling their business, getting more free time, living on purpose. I mean, man, living in these leaders' lives has so many different aspects to it. One of the aspects that I find very tender and really big for them is the idea of how they're going to create change by listening. And somehow throughout their careers, they have learned that change or creating change is about making things happen. And part of it is making things happen. So you decide on a state that you want to create, or you decide on an intention that you choose to create, and then you follow that intention by taking action, and then you have to overcome internal resistance or barriers to doing things that are more courageous, that are fearless, by going into territory that you don't know. You're in the battle of your current conditioned behavior because you're going outside the familiar and going into a new territory. And so this becomes the conflict, that you've made a choice, you're going somewhere, and now you have a current reality that's different than what you want, and you've got to make some informed decisions, some actions, some secondary choices that support the primary goals or primary choices that you have chosen. So what this has become for the majority, and I think this is part of just the unconscious socialization of how we're supposed to create things in our lives, is that it's all about our own potential. So in order for us to overcome the hardships or the barriers or what's difficult, to take the most courageous step, we have to look at ourselves. This is the assumption, that we've got to really look at ourselves for getting this thing to change. Yet, I've found that by creators looking more at themselves, they actually become lousy creators. Now, why is that? Why do people become lousier at creating what they want when they start looking at themselves? I think it's obvious. When a creator is focusing on what they create, when a woman is focusing on creating a baby, when an artist is focusing on creating art, their attention is not on what's going on with them. Their attention, rather, is on what they are seeking to create, what they're seeking to bring into being. This is a very distinctive difference. This is a very big difference in where they bring their energies, where they put their energies. Hence, when I am operating from what is wrong with me, when I'm coming from what I think I am or myself, who am I, then I am motivated by those concepts of what I think I am or what I think I'm not. And we fall into this so easily because over time we start to, through our own memory, out of the experiences we have, we start to gather from our observations conclusions about the way we are. And most often what I find is that deeply layered underneath, people have some very serious doubts about themselves. They have had experiences that have caused pain and injuries, and because of that, they've come upon a conclusion about who they are or who they're not, and they don't recognize going forward the dominance that that conclusion has in surfacing itself in consequences. They don't see how these mental areas, these cognitions that they download from and make sense of things from, play an active role in what seems to play out in terms of patterns in someone's life. So what the coach becomes is an ecosystem to be able to hear or see what one can't see. And what we often can't see is we can't see how we think and how it participates in creating the consequences that we would never want. Because when our motivations are attempting to prevent an outcome from happening, we find fear. And fear is a concept. Fear is not real. Fear is an anticipation of something happening because of what we've experienced in the past. It's false. It's a mirage. It's shadow boxing. And yet so many of us are hypnotized by the fears that we have at the bottom of our motivations. You might say that underlying what we attempt to create, we have these competing commitments. And competing commitments are underlying big assumptions that we make about the way things are supposed to go, the way the world is, the way we are. We hold these assumptions like filters or biases, like theories, which means theater. And when we hold these, we lose our direct description of current reality. In other words, we're caught inside the undertow and the riptide of these concepts. How do we regulate these concepts from getting the best of us? Well, we cultivate a quality of awareness that can do so. So where does awareness come from? It comes from the mind. Is the mind the brain? No. We have a brain and we have a mind. And the brain, what it's geared to do is to acquire and accumulate data so that in its survival instinct it can make sense of things when we live into the present moment, because context is in motion, things are changing, life is not the same. Tomorrow I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to take place. I can't predict the future. So that's a fact. But what my brain wants to do by its own conditioned thinking is to draw forth my judgment as to what's going on and live in the certainty of that. Because the mystery is very confrontational. And yet, the nature of reality, the nature of things, isn't foreseeable. It's just unfolding as we walk. We have to move and do. The doings validate reality. With that being said, then how do we learn to think? Well, we learn to be aware of our thinking. We learn to be aware of the concepts that we hold about who we are. So if I have a negative opinion of myself that I'm stupid, in an attempt to offset that, I'm going to attempt, by manipulating other people and playing a costume, that other people will see me as smart. And I maybe get good at it. Maybe I really shape a lot of my life around guarding my preoccupation with looking stupid, looking dumb. Just think about how much behavior that would coordinate and how much behavior that could become restricting to taking chances, taking risks. So I might only set myself up to look like I know what I'm doing. I may play like I know what's going on or I know what I'm doing more than I really do. There's a lie. I can't be honest about what I lack or what I don't know because it's just too expensive. It's too scary. It's too worrisome for me to have the outside world see how stupid I am, because I'm convinced I am. Or maybe I'm convinced that I'm inadequate. I'm not enough. So I attempt, through my false self-making, I can compose a system to help other people see that I am not that. And so I live in these ideals. The ideals that we form are false standards that we live up to offset our shame and our negative opinions of ourselves. I haven't met a human being that doesn't have these at some level, and the reason why is we've all been through painful experiences. We've had people humiliate us. We've had difficult households. Everyone comes from a dysfunctional family. We've had a bully somewhere in our life, or we've screwed up and made bad decisions and they didn't work out. So we are in a accumulative existence. The brain that we have is a storage device. It stores concepts like data bytes in our brain to reuse. And then we reflex off those concepts as a way of surviving. But the mind is the regulator of these patterns, is the regulator of the way that we think automatically. And so our awareness is able to stand back behind these thoughts and see them as they are precipitating. But there's different levels of being aware. We can be aware of our intellectual activity, but there's another type of pain that also is emotional, that we carry emotional charges, negative emotions that we carry over experiences that have left deposits in us. And in reaction to these pains, out of survival, we've attempted to distance ourselves and to be vulnerable. We can't be vulnerable because it's too painful. So if we had attempted to be joyful, compassionate, which is in our nature, if we attempted to love, and all of that didn't work out, we were negated, abandoned, deprived, then we have composed a system to negate or preemptively strike from getting into looking or being that way again. This is called the voice of cynicism. And we use this voice of cynicism as it's an inner enemy that short circuits our capacity to be intimate and connect and to open our hearts and understand and accept and to legitimize what others are and what they do. So the opposite is to place conditions. And so we don't love or we don't care until there are certain conditions that make it safe. And what we don't do is we don't examine more carefully what those conditions are, and we live in the response to all of it, which is to live in the distancing zone like a porcupine. Some of us even construe that we're not lovable. And then to compensate for that, we destroy other people. But underlying it all is a very deep shame. Because we don't think we are capable or deserving of love, because we may not have been given love, we were given our parents' fantasies that we had to live to. We expended ourselves to be able to get rewarded. We were getting love because we were able to say, hey, I see a way. They told me I had to do this. That's how it's going to work. I'll do it. But we left our authenticity behind. And then over the years, we've layered it on throughout different experiences. And some of our experiences actually were in response to these. Some of the way in which things played out probably was helped by our own distancing, because we feared isolation so much that we may have hung on to a bad relationship too long, and we shouldn't have. Or to counteract some of our pain in the reactivity of it, we found a scapegoat. We found someone to pick on, to destroy, to ventilate, and to let off the steam of our own pain. Because people who hurt. So we are carriers. We're carriers of a lot of contamination and pollution. We're littered with these leftovers and experiences. And these leftovers shape us. They shape and coordinate our behavior if we're not aware of them. It's almost like default. So our voice of judgment and our voice of cynicism can be very, very constraining inner enemies from the possibility of connection with others and the courageous actions that we can take toward what we want to create. But this voice of judgment, man, it just seems to distort our relationship with reality. Even if something else was there, we wouldn't tend to see it because our lenses and our biases are on, and we only look for confirmable information that's consistent with what we tend to see. So this awareness becomes more and more of a key player in helping us separate, observe, and to live with the roommates of our judgment and our cynicism. And then we have this voice of fear that is a fear of things falling apart, fear of failure and humiliation. And these fears, this is an inner enemy that absences, that short circuits our capacity to foster a larger will, a greater good of what our real work is in the world that we sense we need to do and how we need to apply the gifts that are in us. Is we seat these aside, we put them on the sidelines because we're too afraid that we need to figure it all out. So we've got to construct a fancy purpose before we do anything. Or we've got to, instead of going with what our hearts tell us or going with what we truly, in our most inner knowing, our intuitive voice, really need to do with our abilities, we just negate that like a abandoned child that wants to come out and play and energize and bring aliveness. That all seems to go to resolving what the fear is telling us. So what do we do with the fear? Well, how do we do it? Well, this awareness then becomes something even bigger. Is we learn by being aware to consciously let go when the fear is telling us a lie. We meet the fear. And instead of operating from the fear, we can stand with it, next to it, and meet it, and learn from it as a powerful stranger. And as it becomes more and more familiar to us, we kind of learn our requirements when we do get fearful. That we learn when we are, it's because we are going beyond the familiar. We are going outside our comfort zone. We are moving towards something that we may truly want, but yet we don't know how it's all going to work out. And we don't even know how to create it yet. So with that being said, honesty, I think, is a very key word here that isn't about how you meet life and tell the truth. That's not the only piece. It's really how honest you are about not knowing and how powerless you really are. And when you get how life is in the business of creating life and that the universe is a wild card, you restructure, you get on different terms, a different relationship with life when this is awakened to. That honesty is the real face of reality. In whatever shape it's in. Despair, demise, everything's waiting for you. Honesty is knowing that everything the future needs is given to you in this moment. It doesn't suggest that it's optimism. And it doesn't suggest that it's definite pessimism. But it is to be so open that you're expecting nothing and you're ready for anything. That's a boldness. It's like showing up. It's a warrior quality of occupying the honesty of what's currently in this moment. Is there anything else that you can validate? You can think you can. But then you're sort of living in the illusion again. You're out of touch. But to live right here, that is better. To live right here, it is more in the... It is to your favor to create when you have the intention and you attend into the present moment with that intention. When you put your intention at the center of your awareness, you pay attention from what matters to you. So when you relate with life from what matters to you, you begin to notice what is essential to you. You occupy your values. And there's a shift here. There's a shift from the preoccupation with the concepts, specifically your identity and the false self system, to seeing what's at play and actually legitimately accepting what mischief you've been up to, trying to paint a picture to the world to look special and significant. That you've been toggling with, that you've been trying to figure out whether you can live with liking yourself or not liking yourself. But yet there's certain parts of it, truthfully, that you just can't get away from. You don't like certain parts of yourself, you never will. But that doesn't become at issue with what you want to create. This whole self-esteem movement, confidence movement, has been taught to us, has been brainwashed into us that we need to be confident in order to create, that we need to be some person in order to create. But that's not how I've learned how to create. If I want to create cupcakes with my daughter, I don't need to be preoccupied with who I am. In fact, it has nothing to do with my identity. If I want to create a report on specific information, I focus on the report. I don't need to be preoccupied with who I am or whether that report would tell me I'm a good or bad person or not. So to be able to create, I have to start somewhere, and maybe where I start is I start with noticing how preoccupied I am and how fearful I am and how strong my judgment is as to whether I will succeed or fail, and how afraid I am to look stupid and look like a fool. You know, those are all important truths. They are necessary. What's wrong with doubting yourself? You haven't done it yet. You haven't created it yet. Doubts are a very natural thing. But see, we've taken it so far. We make the game about curing our doubting, and so we make it about curing our doubting. And then we spend our whole life trying to get away from our doubts, instead of just choosing to create things we want. I had a guy once tell me he wanted to create a restaurant. And he started to tell me what he needed to do in order to make that restaurant happen, about how he lacked this and lacked that, and he needed to go to school, and he needed to do all these things to go become qualified to create a restaurant. He needed to get his certification in this chef school and all this. And I said, well, you have an urge to create a restaurant. What do you think the best way is to learn how to create a restaurant? And he said, well, go to school. And I said, no, it's starting a restaurant. We don't learn by going and getting all the answers. The reason why we go and get all the answers is because we're motivated by the fear of looking stupid, or we want to predict the future. So we go to try to find all the right answers. And yet, if I look at most creations, very much the creation itself didn't depend on the original answer someone had. They wouldn't be creating if that was the case, because creating is not connected to what you know. Creating is bringing something to exist that doesn't exist yet. Some things you might know, but most of the process will involve you learning as you're going along. The only way to learn how to create is by doing something. Right? Ready, fire, aim. Not ready, aim, fire. So we spend all this time getting ready to get ready, 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 to get ready. When what's really at play is we've come to a state of inaction because we're afraid of the risks. All that is simply we're getting over-dominated by our concepts, hence our fear. So we have a lot of competing forces inside of us. Do we want to live out of the concepts, or do we want to live out of the choices that we make? I suppose that's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice of orientation. Do we want to orient ourselves to the creative in our life, or do we want to orient ourselves to react and respond to the circumstances? I suppose that's a fundamental question, isn't it? I choose to create what I want in my life. I take my cues and my signals by being a predominant creative force in my life. Does that mean I have to change who I am? No. If anything, that helps me understand more of who I am because I have to have a place to start. But that's not my point of reference in making changes in my life. Self-improvement is a hobby. But creating is what it's really about. And since creating is what it's about, I don't need circumstances to be anything in order to create. That doesn't mean I have control. It just means that I am orienting myself around a creative orientation. That's how I come into the present moment. That's how I show up is I come into it with an intention. That doesn't mean I have to justify everything either, because there's going to be tons of skews and nuances and unexpected circumstances that can lead back to a very great amount of creating. And the more I know what those circumstances are, good, bad, and ugly, the more I will be able to learn from them. How do we make life our teacher? We make life our teacher by moving more creatively, having a creative process. Does that mean that without a creative process we're a bad person? No, but I'm hungry to be involved in my life and to create something because I'd like to make the most of while I'm here. Will it be fulfilling? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, but whether I'm fulfilled or not is not what my creation is dependent on. I'll have a lot of bad days on what I'm creating. I've written books, I've created coaching clients, I've created business, I've created all kinds of cool stuff at home, I've created projects, I've been creating just like you. And what I'm noticing in that creative process is that I don't really know the requirements of what it's going to take unless I start. That the requirements are not foreseeable. And that as I go along, I begin to get very conscious about the requirements so that I can build capacity and create and move past those creations. So how do we get unstuck? We start to choose things that we seek to create from a place of love, of generating something out of what matters to us because we truly want it, not because it's a problem we have to get rid of, not because someone said it was the right thing to do, not because we're living someone else's goals, not our own, not because we're lost and trying to act like we have it all together, not because we have to be a certain ideal or a norm we have to live up to, because if we don't, then there's consequences. Not because we're bored, because we create into what per se we want. We just want it for its own sake, per se. Those are the best creative efforts. Is to create out of our love for the end result that we want to create. And we love it by imagining it. It's a fairy tale. It's something we want to create. When Alfred Hitchcock would create a film, he would have the film in an imaginatory image in his mind. He would create from the idea of the film. He'd fall in love with it. That was his favorite part. Then the other part would come with trying to put it all together. That was the part that he dreaded. But what he loved was the initiatory stage of germinating the original film idea. Where do ideas come from? I don't know. I think ideas come from a lot of places. Creativity and creating are two different processes. I can be very creative but not create. And I can create and not be very creative. But they're not the same. I don't need to be creative to create. I don't need to be creative to create a child. I don't need to be creative to create a great painting. I don't need to be creative to create, because creating is learning. And since it's learning, there are a lot of moments when I'm not very creative, but I'm really learning something great by what I'm doing and listening. Sometimes ideas come out of nothing. Sometimes ideas come out of action. Whether it's action or revelation, I think both are very powerful sources. And both become available in the creative process when we start something new. We get energized. We start taking action and moving forward. And as we do, we improvise. We find restraints and constraints, and we also find assets that we didn't see before. But what most is cool about it is we're involved in something. And time seems to change as we're creating. It's like when we're in it, time seems to become, it's sort of moving at a different pace. We change the velocity of time when we're involved in our creations. And then we change how we pay attention to the current moment. It requires that without editorial, without our habitual judgment, that we see where we are compared to where we want to be. And the more that we are honest about it and truthful, without positive thinking, without lying to ourselves, we're able to see where to change or what to change. But we take our identity out of that process. It doesn't mean anything about who we are. It's separate from us. It's third person. It's not first person. It's a creation, and we're a creator. Whether that is a business or our own life-building process, our own values, our own outcomes, our own causes, our own callings, our own careers. Those are all creations that we're bringing into the world. So I hope that this message has touched you in a deep way, that you've thought about several things you may not have seen before, that you have the opening of eyes a bit from what I'm describing to you. That maybe if you're working on yourself, it may be time to hang that up, that old human potential philosophy is outdated. And that maybe you've been running on that model that if you were only this, or if only, or if I only, or if it only, those are all prerequisites that you've mocked up. Maybe you don't think you deserve to create what you desire. You got your worth or your identity caught in it. So that the only time that you desire it is when you have learned how to earn it. So you only get yourself to expect what you desire. So what you do is you set up a bunch of trials. You have to move through a set of qualifications that you set up. Why go through all that work? You don't need to deserve what you desire unless you want to project or impose your your identity on something, and you don't need to, right? And that, powerlessness, we're preoccupied with the powerlessness that we think we should have, but then we construe that we don't. And when we don't, we begin to punchline it with, why even try? Right? The old adage of, why should I wish for what I want because I might not get it? Well, whether you get it or not isn't something you can predict, but whether you want it or not is something very valuable. You can recognize something that you really do want because you know when you don't want it. Your values are simple. They're easy to recognize. You either wanted it or you didn't want it. That was important or it wasn't important. If I want to create a great experience at a ball game on Sunday, what's there to justify about it? I just want to be there. If I want to create a book, what's there to justify about it? Whether I'm qualified or what it means about me or who I am and all that. I just want to create a book. Whether I desire to create a public workshop or not, it's just creating a public workshop. What's all the identity stuff about? Or whether I think I have the power to create it or not. Have I gotten too preoccupied in whether I think I have power or not? Pretty much I'm going to remain powerless over everything because everything is in a state of change. I don't have any guarantees. And the reason why I might procrastinate is because I'm waiting on one. But there isn't a guarantee. All there is just start and learn and reflect and then relearn. By replanning, retuning, it's a continuous process. But we have to step back and we can see by reflection what's actually going on. We can see the kind of the current structure that's at play in our lives by seeing how our voice of judgment is leading to certain patterns that we are enacting in. That by looking at the world through the lenses that we do, we create a strategy. And out of that strategy, we behave. And out of that behavior, we create consequences. And what's that structure geared to do? Well, by thinking the way it's thinking, it inevitably, irreversibly will move toward those consequences. That's why we set goals, but we're often not able to maintain course after we succeed because it's booby-trapped, it's rigged, it's going to backfire because something else, a concept, is still more predominantly the motivation in the system. That's why when you move closer to sometimes a vision or a goal that you have, you find yourself ambushed or outlawed or neutralized to go backwards because the underlying structure doesn't support. It's not in favor of your goals. It's in favor of your concepts and being right and certain. So how do you work with your concepts? You become aware of them. You regulate them. You just hold them. You don't try to fix them. You don't try to rearrange them. You don't try to tell yourself a lie. You don't use affirmations. You don't try to deal with the concepts. You just leave them outside. They're just part of the current reality you have. They're just something you observe. There they are. There they are. Look at that marvelous concept. Look what it does. I understand the patterns that are at play when I am operating from it. Boy, look at that fear. Boy, is that strong. Listen to the gravity of that fear. Boy, I wonder what it wants. Man, that's a really interesting fear. It's like an old friend. Like an old dog. You call it over. Come on over. It's just fear. That's all it is. If you want to live inside of it, you can. But you don't have to. You can be separate from it. Or there's my emotions. There's those negative emotions. Man, look at that anger. Or, wow, look at that sorrow. Or, boy, I really was trespassed against there. I'm not downplaying how these things are. I get how they are. But They don't have to be the standard of reference from which you mobilize action. You don't need to operate from them. You don't have to. This is not about overcoming them. This is not suddenly you taking your power back, and defeating the enemy. No, it's learning how to respect the enemy more. It's not overconfidence. It's preparation. It's honesty. It's having a direct relationship with life, like an acquired taste, of living with the emotions and being in contact with them. What the Creator learns is they learn how to deepen their relationship with life itself. That it's okay to live right within life. Right? That life is in the business of creating something. It's moving all the time. We're in the ongoing process of evolving. We're in a constant drift away from where we were and into something new. Something in us is constantly ready to be born, as something is ready to end. That's the eternal truth. That's just the nature of the reality that we have. But if we're there to be there for us, if we're there to be there for the world, if we're there to live into our places of most potential, where future possibilities can become really, really meaningful to us, and we can live into those possibilities and begin to organize our lives around those principles and possibilities that we choose, then we simply organize our decisions and actions around those. It doesn't guarantee that they will come true, but it orients us in a very interesting way to learn, to be involved in life, and to be present. And I don't think there's a better way to offer ourselves to the world. I think there's a definite, coherent quality of offering ourselves to the world in terms of the ecosystem that we live in that our own communities require this courageousness that we have, this ability to be aware and bring our attention this way to what's going on and be able to manage or foster an intention towards something that matters to us. That being true of ourselves, true to ourselves, is a very powerful choice. And it's one that I suggest that you consider. So these are some of the principles that we teach and coach on in our VIP coaching process. I call this no hype allowed, in that we regulate the human hype out there, the human potential hype, that really in the self-help movement doesn't work. And I don't know why someone hasn't gotten into maybe what we're talking about is what Michael Moore might say about the self-help movement, and saying that only 20% of people who follow it really do something with it and are successful. The other 80% don't, and I think that's worth looking into. So rather than doing all this work, you can think more structurally with things. You can look at the quality of your thinking, and you can work on or choose the creative process as the primary method of achievement, the greatest method in history of civilization. We are natural builders. We are generators. We are natural creators. It is our birthright. It is part of the origins of our own nature, down to the very core of who we are. We are creators. And to create is to lead. To create anything is to lead. It's to lead into territory that is not familiar. So one of our core pieces of our work as coaches is to expand, is to help you master your own personal mastery in creating, in bringing into being the qualities in your life that matter most to you in the heart. So that as you create the universes that you want, you live in them and then continue to create new universes and live in them. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like more information, please go online at highlevelperformance.com. My name is John Davidson from HLP Group High Level Performance. I am the VIP coach, and I enjoyed this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you very much.